Thomas Markle speaking out in the new documentary, Thomas Markle, My Story. The 75-year-old sat down with Britain's Channel 5 in October, participating in a series of interviews over 6 days.
Thomas Markle is finally breaking his silence about Meghan and Harry, and the claims coming out of his mouth are more shocking than anything the tabloids ever dared to print.
The royals owe me. Harry owes me. Meghan owes me. What I've been through, I should be rewarded for.
He is 81 years old. He has survived heart attacks, a stroke, and an amputation that left him in a hospital bed on the other side of the world. And after 8 years of being erased, ignored, and written out of his own daughter's story, he has decided you are going to hear his side before it is too late. Because what he says next changes everything you think you know. The Forgotten Father. Before any of this makes sense, you need to understand who Thomas Markle actually was, because the version of him you know, the frail man in hospital photographs, the punchline of 1,000 royal headlines, is not the man who raised Meghan. Thomas Markle was a somebody in Hollywood long before his daughter ever stepped in front of a camera. He worked for decades as a lighting director on some of the biggest shows on American television, and he was good at it, genuinely good. He won an Emmy for his work. Crews respected him. Directors requested him. This was a man who spent his life making other people look perfect under the lights, never imagining that one day the lights would turn on him and refuse to look away. And by almost every account, including Meghan's own words from years before the wedding, he was a devoted father. When her parents divorced, Thomas stayed deeply involved in her life. He paid for her education at an exclusive private school in Los Angeles. He supported her acting ambitions when they seemed like a long shot. Meghan herself once wrote publicly about how her father taught her to find her light, a lesson from the studio floor that became a metaphor for her whole career. She spent her teenage years close to him, hanging around the sets where he worked, absorbing the rhythms of the industry she would one day conquer. When she struggled through the audition years, the years of rejection and small parts and unpaid bills, Thomas was there. He has said in interviews that he helped her financially well into her 20s, even when his own finances were falling apart. There is even a story, told by Thomas himself, and repeated by family members over the years, that a lottery win in the early 90s helped him cover the costs of Meghan's expensive private education. Whatever the exact accounting, the pattern is not in dispute. He spent his money on her future, and by the time that future arrived, glittering beyond anything either of them could have imagined, his own finances were in ruins. He eventually declared bankruptcy and retired across the border to Mexico, to a modest house in Rosarito, where the sound of the ocean was cheap and the cost of living was manageable on a pension. Hold on to all of that, because everything that comes next, every headline, every lawsuit, every year of silence, lands differently when you remember it. This was not a distant father. This was not a stranger asking for a handout. This was the man who was there for every early chapter, right up until the moment the biggest chapter of all began. And that is exactly when everything fell apart. The staged photos. May 2018. The wedding of the decade is days away. 2 billion people are preparing to watch an American actress marry into the British royal family. And in a quiet Mexican border town, Meghan's father is about to make the worst decision of his life. For months, paparazzi had been camped outside his home in Rosarito. They photographed him buying beer. They photographed him looking disheveled. They photographed him through car windows and shop doorways. And the pictures ran worldwide under mocking captions. Thomas has said the pressure was relentless and humiliating, and that he felt like a hunted animal in his own neighborhood. Nothing in his decades behind the camera had prepared him for life in front of it. He understood lighting, framing, the mechanics of an image. What he did not understand, not yet, was just how much money there was in making him look pathetic, that a single unflattering photograph of the future Duchess's father could be worth more than his entire annual pension. Then a photographer approached him with an offer. Instead of being caught looking his worst, why not stage some pictures that showed him preparing for the wedding with dignity? Reading a book about Britain, being measured for a suit, looking at photos of the happy couple. Thomas agreed. It was, by his own later admission, a serious mistake, and he has apologized for it repeatedly and publicly. Days before the ceremony, a British newspaper exposed the arrangement using security camera footage. The story detonated. The narrative flipped overnight from sympathetic father to money-grabbing embarrassment, and the timing could not have been more catastrophic. Now, here is the part people forget. In the middle of the scandal, Thomas suffered chest pains and was rushed to hospital. Doctors found serious damage. He underwent an emergency procedure on his heart, and his medical team made it clear that an international flight was out of the question. Days before, he was supposed to walk his daughter down the aisle in front of the entire world. Thomas Markle was lying in a hospital bed, watching his role in her life evaporate. He has described those days as the loneliest of his life. And according to him, the phone calls that followed between him and Meghan were strained, painful, and ultimately final. They have not spoken since, not once. Think about that. A father and daughter, once inseparable, and a handful of phone calls in May 2018 turned out to be the last conversations they would ever have. If this story is already hitting you harder than you expected, do one quick thing for us right now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what happened after those final phone calls, the letter, the lawsuits, and the hospital room revelations still to come, is the part the headlines never told you properly. The empty seat. On the morning of May 19, 2018, Thomas Markle sat alone in Mexico and watched his daughter's wedding on television like everyone else. Prince Charles walked Meghan down the aisle in his place. The cameras caught every second of it, the future king escorting the bride, the world cooing over the gesture. And somewhere on the other side of the planet, the man who had actually raised that bride, who had paid for the schools and driven to the auditions and taught her to find her light, watched a stranger perform the role he had rehearsed in his head for 36 years. The world barely noticed his absence. The coverage that morning was all carriages and choirs and the gospel soul of a sermon that stole the show. Where his name did appear, it appeared as scandal, the father who embarrassed the bride, the mess that had been tidied away just in time. Nobody framed it as what it also was, a man watching the single most important day of his daughter's life through a screen, in a small house in Mexico, with a fresh scar on his chest and no way to reach her. Thomas has spoken about that morning only a few times, and when he does, something in his voice changes. He has said he was proud of her and heartbroken at the same time. He has said he cried. He has also said something darker, something that foreshadowed everything to come. He said he realized, watching that broadcast, that he had already been written out of the story. He was right. The letter. 3 months after the wedding, in August 2018, a letter arrived at Thomas Markle's home. 5 pages, handwritten, in Meghan's unmistakable elegant script. The world would eventually learn about this letter in the most dramatic way possible, through one of the most consequential privacy lawsuits in modern British history. But at the time, it was simply a private message from a daughter to a father, and what it contained was not reconciliation. According to the court proceedings that later made much of it public, the letter expressed Meghan's deep pain over her father's interviews and the staged photographs. It asked him to stop talking to the press. It laid out her side of the story in careful, deliberate language. Thomas has said that reading it broke something in him because he had hoped for an olive branch and instead received what felt to him like a closing statement. For months, the letter stayed private. Then, in early 2019, an American magazine ran an article in which anonymous friends of Meghan described the letter in glowing terms, framing it as a loving daughter's plea. Thomas was furious. He believed the characterization was misleading, and he responded by sharing portions of the letter itself with a British newspaper. That decision triggered an avalanche. Meghan sued the newspaper's publisher for violating her privacy and copyright. The case dragged on for years, generated headlines around the world, and ended with Meghan winning. The courts ruled that publishing the letter was unlawful, and she received a public apology printed on the newspaper's front page. Thomas even offered to testify in related litigation, publicly stating that he was willing to stand in a courtroom and give his account under oath. An extraordinary image, a father volunteering to take the stand in proceedings entangled with his own daughter. It never came to that, but the offer alone tells you how completely the relationship had transformed. They were no longer father and daughter working through a rift. They were opposing parties in a story being fought out through lawyers and headlines. But buried inside that legal victory was a detail that hit Thomas harder than losing ever could. Court documents revealed that Meghan had written the letter with the possibility of leakage in mind, choosing her words with an awareness that they might one day be read publicly. Whether that changes how you read the letter is up to you. But put yourself in his chair for a second. What does a father do when he learns that even the most private thing his daughter ever sent him may have been written with an audience in mind? Thomas Markle answered that question the only way he knew how, and his answer is the reason half the world still cannot decide whose side to take. Shouting into silence. What does a father do when his daughter becomes one of the most famous women on earth and refuses to take his calls? In Thomas Markle's case, he talks to anyone who will listen. And this is where his story becomes genuinely complicated, because his critics have a point, and so does he. Over the years since the wedding, Thomas has given interview after interview. He has acknowledged accepting payment for some of them, and royal commentators have argued for years about whether those paychecks undermine everything he says. It is a fair question, and he has answered it the same way every time. He says the phone calls stopped, the letters went nowhere, and the television camera became the only device left on Earth through which his daughter might actually hear his voice. In 2020, he sat for a full-length television documentary about his life. He spoke to Australian television, to British breakfast shows, to anyone with a microphone and a question. His critics saw betrayal every single time. His defenders saw a man banging on a door that would never open, desperation or opportunism, devotion or betrayal. The truth, as it usually does, probably lives somewhere in the uncomfortable middle. But some of what he has said over those years is hard to dismiss as performance. He has said, in almost these exact terms, that convicted murderers in prison still receive visits from their families, and that he made one foolish mistake and has never been forgiven for it. He has pointed at the Sussex's public brand, all that language about compassion and kindness and mental health, and asked the question that never goes away no matter how many times you turn this story over. Where is the compassion for him? Where is the compassion for his family? He has also directed his words at Prince Harry, and this is one of the strangest details in the whole saga. Thomas Markle has never met his son-in-law, not once. Not at the wedding he missed, not before it, not in the 8 years since. 2 phone calls, by his account, are the entire relationship between him and the man who married his daughter. He has said Harry never once got on a plane to look him in the eye, even during the years when the couple lived a short flight away in California. For a family empire built on the language of healing and connection, that detail sits uncomfortably. And then, in the spring of 2022, his body made a decision for him. The stroke. In May 2022, days before he planned to travel to London for Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee, Thomas Markle suffered a major stroke. He survived, but it took his voice. For weeks, one of the most talkative men in the royal orbit could not speak at all. He communicated by writing on a whiteboard. He spent his 80th birthday relearning how to form words. And according to those around him, the first messages he scrawled from that hospital bed were not about himself. They were about wanting to live long enough to fix things with his daughter. Recovery was slow and incomplete. His speech returned, but his health never fully did. And through all of it, according to Thomas and those close to him, the silence from Montecito remained absolute. No call, no card, nothing. The wider family, meanwhile, was fracturing in public. His daughter Samantha, Meghan's half-sister, waged her own long war of words with the Duchess, culminating in a defamation lawsuit against Meghan that was ultimately thrown out by an American court. Thomas Jr. gave his own interviews. The Markles became a kind of cautionary spectacle, a family whose every grievance played out in front of the world, while the one member who had ascended to royalty communicated with them only through statements, court filings, and silence. Thomas has said since the stroke that he stopped expecting reconciliation and started thinking about something smaller and sadder, the simple hope of not dying as a stranger to his own daughter. He said publicly, more than once, that he did not want to leave this world estranged from her, that he would settle for a phone call, a letter, anything. Those pleas were carried by newspapers around the globe. If they were ever answered, no one has said so. But there is one plea he keeps returning to, one wound that cuts deeper than all the rest. The unseen grandchildren. He has 2 grandchildren he has never met. Archie, born in 2019, Lilibet, born in 2021. They are growing up on another continent, in a world of Netflix cameras and polo matches and carefully curated public appearances. And their grandfather has never held either of them. never heard their voices, never watched them take a step or open a birthday present. He knows their faces the same way you do, from the same carefully released photographs everyone else sees. A grandfather learning what his own grandchildren look like from the internet. He has said he would love them to know that their grandfather exists, that he is not the monster the story requires him to be. He talks about them the way you talk about something you have already grieved. Not with anger, not with demands, just the quiet, aching awareness that somewhere across an ocean, two small people who share his blood are growing up believing, if they think of him at all, whatever version of him they are eventually told. When he talks about them, the defiance drains out of him. This is a man who can be combative about almost everything, who shrugs off lawsuits and mockery, and who has openly said the Sussexes are welcome to sue him if they object to his interviews. But on the subject of the grandchildren, there is no fight in him at all, only the flat grief of a man watching time run out. And time, as the next chapter makes brutally clear, is exactly what he is running out of. The hospital bed. In 2025, Thomas Markle made a decision that surprised everyone who follows this saga. He left North America entirely. He sold up, packed his life into boxes, and moved to the Philippines with his son, Thomas Jr., reportedly seeking a quieter, cheaper life, far from the paparazzi lenses that had defined his existence since 2018. For a while, it seemed to work. Then his body gave out again. Reports emerged that Thomas had been rushed into emergency surgery in a Philippine hospital. The details that followed were grim: complications, a second operation. And then the news that shocked even the hardened royal press corps. Doctors had been forced to amputate part of his leg to save his life. Picture that for a moment, really picture it. An 81-year-old man, thousands of miles from the country of his birth, waking up in an intensive care unit to a permanently altered body, in a room where the only familiar face belongs to his son. And then something happened that had not happened in nearly 8 years. According to multiple reports, Meghan reached out. Word came through the press that the Duchess of Sussex had contacted her father as he lay in that hospital bed, reportedly the first direct communication between them since the weeks before her wedding. What exactly was said, and through what channel, remains disputed and hedged in every account. But even the possibility of contact, after everything, ignited a firestorm of commentary. Some saw a daughter finally softening, reaching for her father before it was too late. Others, including voices firmly in Thomas's camp, saw something colder. A gesture made under the pressure of terrible optics. Because a father dying, estranged and alone, is a devastating headline for a brand built on compassion. One prominent commentator noted acidly that a brief message after 8 years of silence is not the same thing as showing up. The debate raged across every royal desk in the world because the timing was impossible to ignore. For 8 years, through the heart attacks, through the stroke, through the whiteboard and the birthdays and the public pleas, there had been nothing. And now, with cameras gathering outside a hospital in the Philippines and the words "estranged father" trending worldwide, contact. Even the most generous observers admitted the optics were doing a lot of the talking. Thomas's own response, filtered through those close to him, and his subsequent remarks, was the response of a man who has been burned too many times to celebrate. Grateful perhaps, hopeful, cautiously, but no longer willing to stay quiet while waiting to find out if the gesture was real. Which brings us to what he is actually saying now, because this is where his claims turn genuinely shocking. The final claims strip away the noise, and the picture Thomas Markle now paints of his daughter and son-in-law is stark. He claims he was cut off not for what he did, but for what he represented, an ordinary, imperfect past that did not fit the image being built. He claims the stage photo scandal became a convenient exit, a justification for a distance that had already been growing as the royal wedding approached. He points out that his mistake was met with permanent exile, while the couple's own missteps have always been met with sympathetic documentaries and softball interviews. He claims the compassion the Sussexes preach to the world has never once been extended to him, and he frames the contrast in the most brutal terms available, comparing his treatment unfavorably to that of convicted criminals who still receive family visits. He claims Harry, a man who has spoken movingly about losing his own parent, never made the slightest effort to know the parent of his own wife, and that this tells you something true about the family's priorities. He claims the reconciliation attempts have all flowed in one direction. His letters, his pleas, his public appeals, met by silence, while the only contact in 8 years arrived when he was in an intensive care unit missing part of a leg, at the precise moment his death would have become their public relations catastrophe. And he says he is no longer afraid of the consequences of saying any of this. He has stated flatly that they can sue him if they like. At his age, in his condition, the usual weapons of reputation management simply have nothing left to threaten him with. A man who has survived heart attacks, a stroke, and an amputation, who lives an ocean away from the story that consumed his life, has reached the one condition that money and power cannot manage. He has nothing left to lose. Taken together, his claims amount to an accusation the Sussexes have never directly answered. Not that Meghan wronged him with one decision, but that the entire machinery of her public image required his erasure, and that the erasure was carried out without mercy, without explanation, and without end. You do not have to believe every word Thomas Markle says. He is not a neutral witness. He has taken money for interviews. He staged photographs and lied about it, by his own admission. His memory is filtered through pain and pride and the strange, disorienting experience of watching your own child become one of the most famous women alive. But dismissing him entirely requires you to believe something equally uncomfortable, that a father's 8 years of pleading was all performance, and that the silence which answered it was all wisdom. The last question. Every family estrangement has two sides, and this one is no exception. Meghan's defenders point to real grievances, the interviews, the stage photos, the endless press appearances that made every private wound public. Those grievances are not invented. They are documented, litigated, and in one famous courtroom, vindicated. But here is the question that will not go away, the one Thomas Markle has now put in front of the world, in the bluntest possible terms. When this man dies, and given his health that day may not be far off, what will the silence have been worth? He will die having never met his grandchildren, never shaken his son-in-law's hand, never heard his daughter's voice again, unless that hospital bed message becomes something more than a gesture. Thomas Markle broke his silence because he decided that being called bitter was better than being erased. Whether history remembers him as a wronged father or a walking cautionary tale will depend on things he can no longer control. But his story is now on the record, in his own words, exactly as he wanted it, unfiltered, unmanaged, unforgotten. So, now it is your turn. After everything you have just heard, who do you think owes the first real apology, Thomas or Meghan? Drop your answer in the comments because this audience never holds back and we read every single one. And if you made it this far, do not leave without subscribing and turning on notifications, because this story is far from over, and when the next chapter breaks, you will want to be here for it.